All right, so good morning, everyone. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the Lord's Prayer and think about the meanings of it. But most importantly, I don't know about you. We know in Spiritism that what really matters when we are praying is the feelings that we have and that we put in each word that we say. So this is the prayer that Jesus taught us. And I find myself every time that I do this prayer in an exercise to feel. How do you do a prayer that you have memorized, right? And as you go through the words, I always observe, am I saying this and feeling this, or am I just saying this? And I feel like for most part, when I hear it's being said, it comes out so automatically from the person who is saying it. Sometimes even so fast that I think there's no way that person is actually feeling what he or she is saying. So part of the proposal for today is to seek to understand a little bit what the prayer proposes and understands what the sentences mean, so that through understanding we can get to the feelings, so that next time we do it, we are able to say and to be a little bit more connected to the feelings behind it. And I will tell you that it's an ongoing exercise, because the prayer, as we'll see, it's extremely concise, which is a characteristic of very elevated spirits. We need lots of words to say very little. They use very little words to say a lot. So you read it and it's so concise, but it's so deep, it's so loaded with teachings that only as we evolve and as we better understand those teachings, not only with our minds and with our hearts, that we'll be able to do a truly heartfelt Lord's Prayer. But we got to start from somewhere, right? And so this is a proposal for a place to start. So first of all, we find it in chapter 28 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is a collection of Spiritist prayers. And when we go through this, there's a structure for this chapter, as there is a structure for the entire Gospel. And we did talk a little bit about the structure of the Gospel in the last talk. But today, so you have for each prayer an introduction. The introduction talks to us about the goals and the motives and the application, and then you have the actual prayer. And before it gets into the prayers, which the Lord's Prayer is the first one, there is this preamble that I took a few aspects of it. One of them I have already mentioned. It says there that the Lord's Prayer is the most perfect model of conciseness, a true masterwork of sublimity in its simplicity. So I did mention the conciseness aspect of it, which makes it a little harder for us to understand. It's too concise in a way, but also it's very simple. That really strikes me because we have often the association of things that are with, I don't know, a lot of components, a lot of aspects, a lot of flowers, and to be what is beautiful. But here the proposal is, it's just very simple, and in this simplicity there is an incredible beauty, which is also challenging for us. And then it says, in fact, in its highly concise form, it sums up all the duties of humans towards God themselves and their neighbor. So you read that in the Gospel, right? And do we really stop to reflect, okay, the spirits are telling us that this prayer sums up all the duties. Okay? Do we ever connect the Lord's Prayer to the idea of duties? In other words, what are duties? Duties is the fulfillment of God's laws, right? So, okay, so the prayer is giving us a path. Everything in it leads to the fulfillment of God's laws. So it's important that we pay attention to that. And then it puts the duties in 3 levels: towards God, towards themselves, and towards their neighbors. So when it starts, it says the first sentence is our Father, right? The first 2 words, not sentence, is our Father. So how does that connect to this concept here? So when you reach out to God and you say Father, right? You are recognizing this superior power, and you are seeking God, you are relating to God, you are acknowledging God, you are placing God in its proper place, a place of being the source of everything, of being the first cause, a place of power. So you are fulfilling your duties towards God, in the sense that when we say our Father, this Father needs to be fulfilled by these associations and the feelings that come with the association. But when we say our Father, we are now acknowledging the human family as ours. So that entails our duty towards every single human being. Not only our biological or family, closest family, our closest friends, but everyone. So our Father recognizes God as a higher power, recognizes every single person as part of our spiritual family, and recognizes my place, my individual place as a child of God, also deserving that I fulfill the duties towards myself. So if you see, in every single aspect, and this is just one example, this fulfillment of the duties towards God, towards our neighbors, and towards ourselves is present. And then it's going to go on and say, hallowed be thy name, for example. And so when we say, hallowed be thy name, we are, actually, hold on a second. I'll get to that in a minute. Let's go back, let's just skip forward. So it says it entails, in the gospel, a profession of faith, an act of worship and submission, a request for life necessities, and the principle of charity. So again, I read this many times before in the gospel, and you go through it, and it's like, okay, but let's think about it for a second. So when it says like that entails a profession of faith, what does that mean exactly? Right? So a profession of faith is a public declaration of one's beliefs and religious doctrines, meaning that every single act of our lives, our conduct, should be our profession of faith, should be a display of what we believe. So that's a profession of faith. An act of worship and submission. So these are all parts and characteristics of the prayer. So if you think of the prayer starts by reaching out to God. Every time we reach out to God through our thoughts and through our feelings, it is an act of worship, because it's an act of acknowledgement. It's an act of relating. So an act of worship, when you say our Father, just the movement of seeking God means that, and you are seeking God from a position of a child, of smallness, of understanding that there is something higher than you. Most importantly, something that is infinitely wise and capable of taking care of you. Then you say, then you have, so the very first part, and we're going to go to the very first part of the prayer, it's about worship and it's about submission. When the prayer says, thy will be done, you are submitting to God's, again, intelligence. You're acknowledging that you don't know much. We cannot see much. We are very much like, I really like this analogy from the gospel, the blind man on the side of the road. That's our vision. We are blind and we are on the side of the road. That's how we are taught. So when we say, thy will be done, we are recognizing that we don't know much of anything, that we cannot really see. What we see is just a tiny, tiny little piece of what is real. And so it is an act of worship because there is a movement towards God. It is an act of submission. You are giving to God the control. You are telling, right? You are telling yourself that God is the one in charge of life. And then there's a second part that is a request for life necessities. When? When in the Lord's Prayer?
Daily bread.
Our daily bread, right? So it is an acknowledgement that there is a material life and there are needs that need to be attended at the present moment. But there is also the principle of charity within this prayer. When we say, give us, for example, our daily bread, interesting, because the prayer doesn't say, please God, give me my daily bread. It's our daily bread. So you're thinking about humanity. You want the bread to be available to all creatures. In that thought, in the acknowledge of the neighbor, of the other, there is already a principle of love, charity, and you moving from the center and say, I'm not asking this for me, but I'm asking this for all, right? And when you ask God to forgive, as you forgive others, in forgiveness, there's also charity. There's also love. So the prayer has these three aspects that we're going to look a little bit more in detail as we go through them. So finish the preamble, we say, because of its brevity, however, the profound meaning contained in some of the words that compose it escapes most people. That is why it is usually said without directing one's thought to the application of its part. It is said as a formula whose effectiveness is in proportion to the number of times it's repeated, right? As if the strength of the prayer was, let's just keep saying it. But we need two things. We know that knowledge is not enough to transform us. We need to feel. Whatever we know needs to be integrated into our feelings and into our consciousness where the laws are. They need to be clear and they need to be integrated so that what we are saying can be manifested in actions. So it needs to be embedded in us, not only in our thoughts, but in our feelings so that it can be transformative. Very well. So it starts, like I said, the first time is praise. And then I want to bring these, I'm going to be using a few books by Emmanuel, Living Spring, The Way, The Path, The Light and the Truth. And also the book Good News to go over some of these sentences. So Emmanuel has, in Living Spring 164, the chapter is called Our Father. And here he talks about the father figure. And when he says, in the moments of work and prayer, joy and suffering, Jesus looks to the Supreme Lord in the position of a trusting son. So he is our reference, and that's how he related to God. The Master set the standard attitude we would have in God's presence. There's no pointless research, there's no urgent questioning, there's no inappropriate demanding, there is no irreverent defining. So I love this because, you know, God is out there, so unreachable for us, so difficult to understand, that in the present moment, the safest and probably the only path for us to understand God is through our feelings. And that's what Emmanuel says. A lot of times we get lost in connection because we are, and it's not saying that, science doesn't have a place. It's none of that. But it's when that stuff becomes so primary and you get lost. You get lost into translation. You just, that becomes noise. And you're unable to connect with God from this perspective that Jesus is show us, which is the perspective of a trusting son. I never forget when one of our friends and speaker here at Conscious talk about the image of a child who is standing at the edge of the pool with the father within the water with open arms, and the child is very little, and the child is very afraid to jump. But eventually, with the father's encouragement, the child goes ahead and jump, right? And jump because the child knows that he's the father, and the father will not let anything bad happen to that child. And so that is the feeling that we are invited to experience when we say, our Father. The feeling of connection with this God, the feeling of connection with this force, no matter how chaotic our life is, no matter how perhaps bad we may feel that things are going, there is a Father that will protect us and that will never let anything bad happen to us. Because what we call bad often is the resources that the law offers to us for our re-education, for our learning. So bad is a very materialistic and human perspective. There's nothing bad. Everything, even what we call or perceive as bad, is in reality good. Because the laws are perfect. The laws are laws of goodness and love. The laws are laws that are caring for us. So dealing with the consequences and even the material perspective where we see someone is hurting or getting hurt, this is not a work of God hurting us, but rather God, with its perfect laws, helping us to see and to understand what serves us and what does not serve us. So I would like to remind you that, in Matthew 7, we have, which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake. If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So that's something for us to go back and always remember. And so I really love this picture because it is like, I think it embodies the feelings that when we say our Father, of this child, of this looking up above, I could say look up within as well, and connecting with God in that way. Emmanuel also has a page on chapter 77 where he's going to emphasize the our aspect, which says, with a simple possessive pronoun, the master extols the community. After God, humankind is to be the fundamental themes of our lives. All the triumphs and failures that illuminate or darken the earth are somehow our own. The tears of one hemisphere echo in the other. So this is so profound. We could stop here and have an entire lecture only on this, right? But this is it. So the simplicity. One possessive pronoun has so much meaning. So humankind should be, after God, humankind, our brothers and sisters, should be the fundamental themes of our lives. Our lives needs to be dedicated to this humanity. Needs to be dedicated to every single act, every single moment of our life. We should be thinking, what do I have to offer? How can I at work? How can I at home? How can I here at the Spiritual Center? Anywhere I am. How can I make the lives of my brothers and sisters better? Sometimes it's a word of kindness, but it's a mental status. It's an intent that we need to set deep in our soul. And make that part of our daily lives. So we only explored 2 words so far, right? And we have so much more to go. But that speaks about the depth of this prayer. And then he goes on to say, "Who art in heaven." And so when we talk about who art in heaven, and the word heaven over there, it talks about where is heaven, right? So heaven is everywhere, every time that we are connected with the truth, every time that we are in a peace, in a place of more peace, of more harmony, that will be heaven. So there is no specific place that we call heaven. And when we look at the book Good News, in chapter 19, this is a passage where the Samaritan, the woman, she's talking to Jesus, and she will say, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you Jews say that Jerusalem is the place where one must worship." And Jesus will say, "The true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth." By that, what he means is there is really no, again, specific place to worship. And the Samaritans at the time, that they believed that God should be worshipped in the mountains, and others believe that you need to go to the temple in order to worship God. So when Jesus says that the Father is to be worshipped in spirit and in truth, is basically that it can be anywhere as long as it's heartfelt and done with devotion. So when we get to "Our Father who art in heaven," these are some of the feelings that we can connect to this sentence: of connection, of submission, surrender, fraternity, family, brotherhood, equality, hope, understanding, compassion, potentialities, protection, God's availability, omnipresent, possibilities, whatever, right? I try to mimic Carlos. I love his slides with the words. So inspire on his lecture from last week. So it depends a little bit on where you are in the moment that you do the prayer, but there are. So I recommend that you say very slowly and see what comes up and connect with the feelings when you say, "Our Father who art in heaven." Now, "Hallowed be thy name." It's an interesting sentence because hallow is a saint or a holy person, and God is that, unquestionable, unbroken, indivisible, pure. So the question is, why didn't Jesus say, "Hallowed is thy name," and said, "Hallowed be thy name"? Because he could have said, "Hallowed is thy name," or your name, right? Because what he is invoking and asking us to do is to sanctify God's name, again, in our deeds. So it's an invitation for us to, is a profession of faith, to exemplify the way that we glorify God, the way that we sanctify God in our actions, in our thoughts, in everything that we do. And we have, again, another lesson by Emmanuel in Living Spring. That's lesson 11, "Let us glorify," reminding us the importance that to glorify God's name, we do enjoy, but we also do in the moments of difficulty. And Emmanuel will give many, many examples, but I took one when he says, "The flower opens, velvety and sublime, it quickly gives thanks. Bless the dark soil that fill me with fragrance." And so he has many examples of like how in nature it is the the difficulties, it is the challenging situations that will give rise for something beautiful, for something useful, for something sacred. So he will recommend, in all the difficulties and darkness, may our Father be glorified forever and ever. So when we say, hallowed be thy name, we want to manifest our trust and our glorification of God, not only in the moments that life is going our way and we feel joy that things are working out for us, but also in the moments that things don't seem to be going our way, or we in a lot of darkness and trouble, because deep inside we know that God is working to extract the purity that exists within us. This little heart that I have on the bottom is just to remind that all those things that we are talking about, they need to be transformed in sentiments when we are talking about the prayer. So, thy kingdom come, it is the presence of the kingdom of heaven, which is in the human heart, as Jesus talks in chapter 3 of Good News. The title of the chapter is First Proclamations. And again, if you have not read this book, and if you don't have this book, it's a book that I really, really highly recommend. One of my favorite books to read, and has so many wonderful teachings of Jesus. So this is in chapter 3. And he's going to define the kingdom of God by saying that it is the divine work in the human heart. So it is this place that we all aspire to achieve, to conquer, or to build within ourselves. So when we say, thy kingdom come, I believe that the feeling is this deep desire. Deep desire. So the kingdom is going to come to us as we move towards the kingdom, as we get up each day to do the work, as we find the strength to battle our daily battles. That is the construction. So, thy kingdom come is to say, is to feel deep inside, let me find the strength to do the work that I need to do. Let me find the strength to press forward, because what life is offering me is material, is the tools so that I can build the kingdom within myself. So it is a plea for strength and for our desire for this place of peace, of reparation, of balance, to be strengthened within us so that we can get up every day and keep going. We all need that from time to time. So connect with your desire of the experience of the kingdom of heaven while you're doing your prayer. And then in the dialogue that we find in this book, Jesus is going to say, there is no marble purer and more beautiful than the sentiments. There is no chisel better than goodwill. So the work in the sentiments and with the instrument of goodwill. Do you know Rome and Athens? I know love and truth. I know the will of my Father who is in heaven. So thy kingdom come is also a pursuit to, again, fulfill your duties. Go back to the very beginning, to the preamble, right? What is God's will? God's will is our will. It's not different than our will. What happens is that our will gets stained by our illusions. We get confused on what we truly want. So one day we'll say, I want peace, but the next day I am nurturing conflict. So it's this contrast that characterize our daily lives. So thy kingdom come. So again, tap into the feelings, find within yourself the desire to experience the kingdom of heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So I think that is probably one of the most difficult parts when you say thy will be done, because we are constantly fighting God on that. So the feeling is really one of surrender. When you say that, you really have to step down from this high place that we place ourselves, where we think that we really know what's best for us, and recognize. So it calls for a lot of humbleness, of recognizing that we really don't know much of anything, and really telling God, you know, thy will be done, your will, not mine. So here also from Good News, and this is chapter 12, it reads, in demonstrating that the kingdom of God must be the primary concern of souls, nobody but Jesus has been able to withdraw at an appropriate time in obedience to the divine plan. This is one of my favorite passages of this book. And I have talked about it different times here, because it is the time that Jesus is actually walking to to be crucified. And I mentioned this before in other lectures. It is a moment where he is no longer the master, but he is the son who is obedient to the Father. So Humberto de Campos, the Spiritist author, has a beautiful, beautiful description of this moment that really describes what obedience is. After the magnificent victory of his entrance into Jerusalem, he's betrayed by his beloved disciples. In the supreme hour, Jesus teaches everyone the sublime virtue of withdrawing into human solitude, but with divine protection. He, who transformed all of Galilee into a divine fount, who had boldly confronted the hypocrisy of Pharisaism, who had thwarted the money changers right in the temple of Jerusalem, like a tireless and superior advocate for all the great causes of the truth and the good, becomes, on the day of the Calvary, a spectacle for the people, which he showed in a wonderful and profound silence. Without the slightest complaint, he humbly walks, crowned with thorns, holding a soiled reed for a scepter, wearing a purple tunic of sarcasm, while being spit on by fanatics, his face covered in blood and staggering under the weight of the cross, vilified, submissive. It's powerful. It's very powerful. And what I want to highlight here is how Humberto de Campos describes first, on the first sentences, his role as a master, his power, his voice. He was very vocal. He said his truth, but in that moment, he was in complete silence. Not one complaint, not one word. So this is obedience. So when we say, thy will be done, we need to go into this place of solitude with God. Submissive and connected. And when we say those words, let's remember this. Let's go back to this place of surrendering, of obedience, because what keeps us on this planet is our lack of obedience. What has kept us in this planet and keeps us today is the fact that we want things done our way. It is, as it says in the gospel, it is a world characterized by spirits who have been rebellious to the law. So we need to say this, and we really need to tap into this feeling of surrendering. What it comes to mind is when people pray and they go on their knees and they bow, we don't need to do that physically, but that needs to be our mental state where we kneel and we bow alone, but with God, knowing that that power is holding us and sustaining us. Not easy. And then it taps into, so this ends the first part, which is the part of praise and devotion to God. And then now it enters on the earthly elements, which it's the material life, it's the struggles, and also the part of charity. So as I mentioned before, give us this day our daily bread. There's so much that can be said about that, but I want to focus on give us, and I already mentioned that, our daily bread. There is no happiness if we have so much and so many people have so little. I like to tell this little story about Chico Xavier, that he was in a little market with a friend, and they were looking at this display of tomatoes, and he's picking up the tomatoes, and the friend notices something weird, and he says, Chico, have you noticed that some of the tomatoes that you picked up are not like the best ones? And he said, but if I take all the best ones, then the next person only will have the bad ones. So he was picking one good one and one so-so, one good one and one so-so, right? That is an awareness of the other. That is an awareness that we need. When we are asking, we're not really asking only for ourselves. Like we do on hurricane season. We go to the grocery store and we grab everything that we can. We have no thought that someone else comes after us. Let me take what I think I will need for, in trust. Trust that God will give. So everyone can have. So this is a philosophy of life that, again, we are very far from embodying, because we are very, very focused on our personal well-being and the well-being of the people who are close to us. It takes for us effort. It's an exercise. So when we say, give us this day our daily bread, we need to be thinking of humanity, not only ourselves. Please, God, let us be bread for every single person. And in order for this to happen, I'm going to ask the bread for this day, not for all the future. Mm-hmm. Because today, what is it that I need today? Because a lot of us are just accumulating for a future that a lot of times doesn't even happen. Mm-hmm. It's not even going to be there for us. Taking away from others. So these are things, when we talk about give us today our daily bread, it's also inviting us to be content with what is necessary. To think about what is it that I need today. And reminds us of the dangers of envy, and the ability and how to think of prudence and foresight. So there's a lot in there for us to think about and to reflect. But I think when you say give us this day our daily bread, it's really, I think the feeling is we need to expand our heart, our thoughts, and our energy to be one that is more embracing. Start living without being so self-focused, and to understand that there is so much need in this world, and that our mission is to live this life a little better, but also make sure that we left the world a little better. And so, give us this day our daily bread. I think it's to embody this feeling of humanity as our family, and really wish that everybody can have a life of dignity. Not equality, material equality, but dignity. That people are not struggling to survive, but they can live what they have. Everybody has what is necessary to live. Forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. So, what is interesting here is that there is a conditional situation when Jesus used the us. And this reminds us, or takes us to the parable of the unforgiving creditor, which is the one that you have the man who owes, I'm going to try to summarize, the servant who owes his employer, and the employer asked for him to pay his debt, which was a large sum, and he pleads and begs for forgiveness that he will pay later because he doesn't have the means at the moment. And then the employer becomes, is moved, is touched by that, and forgives him and allows him to pay later. And as he leaves, he finds someone else who owes him a much smaller sum. And the guy, in the same way, pleads for forgiveness, says that he will pay him at a later time, and he does not forgive the man. So the employer hears about it, brings him back, and he's taken to prison. So this parable really illustrates what this sentence is about. But what I want to, an aspect that I want to bring about this reflection is the fact that Jesus refers to God in different ways. Sometimes he will talk about our God. Sometimes he refers to God directly. I and my Father is his Father. And sometimes he refers to God like in Matthew 6:14. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. What do we make of that? Why is it that Jesus sometimes refers to my, sometimes our Father, and sometimes your Father? Have you ever thought about it? No. So when he talks about my Father, is Father as he understands it, in his direct connection with God. When he talks about your Father, is the Father that we can comprehend at this moment. And the Father that we comprehend this moment is a Father that needs to forgive. His Father does not need to forgive, but our Father does. So when he says, forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors, he's really talking about self-forgiveness. Because it is our Father, the Father that resides in us, the Father that we understand, this Father that still needs to forgive. So it's the Father that resides in us. So as we forgive our debtors, as we do more love, as we are more charitable, we absolve ourselves. We start to enter in a state of forgiveness. So it's not that God will ever need to forgive us, because there is no such thing as an absurd idea that God will forgive us. But it is a process of self-forgiveness. It is our inner God who becomes more loving, who becomes more compassionate, as we become more virtuous, as we become, and so one thing is connected to the other and leads to forgiveness. A forgiveness that comes actually from within. A forgiveness that has to do with the clearance of our own consciousness, with our connection with love within and outside of us. So that's a very different way of thinking about this sentence. So forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. So it is, again, our work to define God, to feel God in a different way, and an invitation for us to love, and in loving, release our mind from the guilt that we bring and find forgiveness for ourselves. In closing, do not let us fall or yield us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And I did bring this passage from The Way, the Truth, and the Life. This is chapter 129. It's called The Origin of Temptations. And it starts with this passage from James. But all are tempted when they are attracted and enticed due to their own concupiscence. I practice this at home with Google, but I still cannot say it. Anyway, it is sinful lust or desire, right? And so Emmanuel is going to look at this passage and he's going to say, let us examine temptation and concupiscence. The former exteriorize the latter. So temptation is an exteriorization of these desires that we have within ourselves. which in turn constitutes the perverse and corrupt foundations of primitive human nature. Let us look at the verb to attract. We can verify the extent of our inferiority by the nature of situations that attract us. So these are two sentences from this chapter, but I think what is important for us to always remember is that anytime we're talking about temptation, we're talking about what is within us, never outside of us. And there's a very simple way of thinking of this, which is two people might be facing a situation for which one is super tempted to yield into temptation and the other one is not. The situation, the outside situation is exactly the same. What is different is what is within the person, is the vulnerability, is the wounds, the darkness, whatever it is the emptiness that makes the person crave for that is outside. So when we say, do not let us fall or yield into temptation, but deliver us from evil, it is seeking, the feeling is to seek the strength, to seek the path to connect with what is really good and essential. Because our nature, our primitive nature, is not going to be transformed by the end of this lecture, by the end of this life. So there's something called inner transformation, and there's something that the spirits are going to tell us in the Spirit's book that is absolutely necessary for us to do in this life, which is to tame our behavior, which is different than transformation. But it is the moment that we recognize that those primitive feelings still are within us and that we want to act on them, but we understand that they no longer serve to us. We also understand that the evil is not outside of us, but it's something that I need to work. I need to understand why I'm so attracted to this. But in the meantime, which is a long meantime, I now have the possibility to tame, to say, I want to do it, but I'm going to refrain from doing it. And while I'm refraining so I don't hurt others, I don't hurt myself, let me look inside and see why am I so tempted to do this or to do that, right? Which can be a number of things. And as he says, look at, what one path and one way to do this work is to look at what are we attracting to our life. Not only the type of people, but the type of situations, the type of circumstances. And why are we attracting this to our life can be the beginning of a reflection to understand what's happening within us. Mm-hmm. And you went with so be it. So when you say so be it, you are signing. You did the prayer, and now you're signing and saying, okay, I'm abiding to all these things that I have said, and most importantly, to all these things that I am feeling, and I am committing to do this work. So if you're unsure, don't say so be it. You finish without the so be it, because you are putting your signature at the end of the prayer. So I hope that, 15 minutes is definitely such a short time. I think some of these items, if not each one of them, could be an entire lecture, each sentence. But when we say it, if we at least understand what is being said and some of these nuances that at first escape to us, like, for example, hallowed be thy name, what does that mean? Why was it said that way? If we can connect with this understanding, it will help us also to connect with the feelings and hopefully use this prayer in a more powerful way as I would say primarily as a tool to connect with God. It's so strong, the part of reaching out to God, connecting to God. We are so often disconnected, and one thing that I personally feel is as you go through life and your day by day, I find myself thinking, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I can do? Which is all good, but am I thinking that there is a God above me, right? Am I considering that I may not be able to do everything that I want to do? I may not be able to fix everything that I want to fix, but there is someone or something that will be able to do that. And really surrendering and connecting. And when we connect with God, when we have this connection more powerful and solidly installed, let's say, within us, then everything else flows from that point, because now you see your neighbor as your brother and you see yourself as divine and worthy. So that's it. Thank you.